Hello, I'm Calvin Cooper from CRC Accountancy.
And hi, I'm Lauren Cook from D&H, and welcome to the second video in our three-part mini-series on property letting. So in the first episode we talked about starting out with your property letting business, and in the second episode we are going to look at what you have to do when your business is up and running. So from a legal point of view, you might, or hopefully things go well and you don't need as much legal input but as you would with your accountant, but yeah, she just never quite knows, so we'll touch on some potential issues a bit later on.
Definitely. So we will, obviously when you're up and running, you will have to submit tax returns each year, but we're not going to focus on that because that's kind of a given with a lot of this stuff. Instead of talking about tax returns, we will start off with the big stuff. What happens if you need to make some fairly significant repairs to the property? Now, it can happen if you have bad tenants. It could even happen just because you want to make the property a bit nicer. So if you're looking to replace the kitchen, for example, or replace single glazing windows with double glazing windows, costs like that, so long as it's just a modern equivalent, are actually all allowed as a deductible expense against your taxable profits. So you can get tax relief on all of that cost. Whereas if you improve the property significantly, so if you put an extension on it, that's something that wasn't there before. So that cost will be added to the capital cost of the property, and you'll only get relief for that when you come to sell it.
Okay. So thinking about what Calvin's speaking about in terms of larger alterations, thinking about that with my legal hat on, please make sure that if you do carry out alterations that you get any necessary planning permission or building warrant, particularly if you're in a conservation area, which, as we all know, there are a few of those up here. These things can become an issue if you haven't got them and you later look to sell the property, so it's best to get those when you carry out the alterations. Yeah,
that's right, yeah. And then there's also the costs that might be involved with some smaller things that don't require planning permission. So just the costs of replacing things that might get damaged on a month-to-month basis. So if you are replacing, for example, a sofa that has always been there, then you will now get relief for that, for the cost of your new sofa against your property profits. Whereas if you are buying a new sofa or a new bed, for example in a property that was previously unfurnished, those are also capital costs and you don't get the tax relief for them against your income unless it is a furnished holiday let.
Okay. One thing that I am interested in, and you spoke about it in the first episode, was tax reliefs for furnished holiday lets. So could you explain a bit more about those?
So furnished holiday lets on a year-to-year basis have two good advantages for tax purposes. The first being that you get capital allowances on equipment and plant and furniture that you're using in the property, similar to other kind of trading businesses. Whereas a long-term let, you don't get that because they are considered an investment rather than a business by HMRC.
Okay.
The other advantage is that the profits from a furnished holiday let are considered as relevant earnings for pension purposes. So in the UK we get tax relief on pension contributions that we make, but that is restricted to the amount of our relevant earnings in a tax year. So that is our employment income, our business profits, and our furnished holiday let profits.
Okay.
So again, if you're looking to save a bit of money by putting more money into a pension, you can include the profits from your furnished holiday let to see how much you can put into a pension in order to get relief.
Okay. So how do you qualify for these reliefs?
So, good question. There are 3 conditions, and you have to meet all of them. There's no exceptions, unfortunately. So the first is that it has to be available for let as a furnished holiday let for 210 days in the tax year as a minimum. The second is that it must actually be let as a furnished holiday let for 105 days in the tax year. So that's 15 weeks. And the third is that it cannot be let on a long-term basis for more than 155 days in the tax year. So a long-term basis for these rules is it's letting to a single person for 31 days or more at a time. There are some exemptions if you fail to meet some of these conditions. So if you have a couple of furnished holiday lets and, for example, one of them does meet the conditions but the other doesn't, you can average the two across the tax year. So they they take the rules and they look at your whole property portfolio. Whereas, and in addition, if you miss it for fairly exceptional circumstances, you are able to claim a period of grace election, and they will deem you to have qualified, so long as you do meet the conditions in another tax year.
Okay. So, sorry, you've just mentioned longer term holiday letting, which has made me think, from a legal point of view, and we touched on in the last episode about some people who might want to use a model where you do shorter holiday lets over the summer and long-term letting over the winter. And as I mentioned before, you do need to bear in mind that there have been significant changes in the law in relation to private residential tenancies, which mean that the tenants now have greater security of tenure. So if you do choose to do longer term letting over the winter, you have to bear in mind that there is the possibility that there could be difficulties when you try to remove the tenant from the property. And in those circumstances, that's when you would need legal input as well.
Yes,
and also if you're having problems with your tenants, generally, then you may need our help.
Because let's be honest, there are some crappy tenants out there.
Yes, there are.
There's no point lying about that. I'm sure you've all heard some horror stories, but there's lots of good ones out there too.
Yes.
So we continue to say that this is a good way forward for business.
Yes, definitely.
So we also need to consider the relief that you get for the interest that you pay on the mortgage that you would have against your property. Now, it used to be that the interest that you paid on your mortgage was wholly deductible against your tax, and yeah, happy days. If you're a high rate taxpayer, you got all the relief as well. They changed that a couple of years ago, and they are staggering in new rules, which mean that regardless of what tax bracket you are in, you only get basic rate relief for your interest.
Okay.
So what that means in reality is if you paid £1,000 of interest and you were a higher rate taxpayer, previously you would have gotten £400 of tax relief on that, tax back into your pocket. But now, in a couple of years' time, once this new staggered rules are complete, you will only get £200 back in your pocket, the basic rate of tax being 20%. So for basic rate taxpayers, this hasn't affected anyone at all, but for higher rate or additional rate taxpayers, especially folk that perhaps have big property portfolios, this is representing quite a big new cost to them.
Seems quite significant.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a lot, yeah.
Speaking of mortgages as well, if you are looking to remortgage, so if you're changing lender, then you would need legal input at that point as well, because we would need to reconstitute the security in favour of the new lender. So bear that in mind as well.
Definitely. I think that's probably a lot of the big points we wanted to touch on in this video.
Yes, yep. And next time we'll look at, as Calvin's mentioned, what happens when your property letting business is coming to an end by whatever means that may be.
So we'll consider some of the capital gains tax, inheritance tax, some of the legal advice you'll need if you look to sell it or pass it on to anyone else. So we hope you join us for that then. We'll see you next time. Cheers.
Bye.